everybody hear me? Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3. Sound check. How's everybody doing this morning? Good. So we'll probably want to increase this one a little bit more. So we're just doing a quick little sound check. So, all right. Come on in, have a seat. We'll get started here pretty soon. Now I'm testing the other microphone. Everybody hear me on this one as well? Might need just a little bit more. Jessica, I think, speaks just a little bit softer. So I just have to make sure that I stay behind the speakers so we don't get a huge gain. All right. Thank you, thank you, thank you, sound engineer.
Hello? Hello, is this thing on? Can you hear me? Beautiful. We got a few people filing in here at the back yet, but I'm going to go ahead and get started. I want to thank everyone for coming here today. There's been a lot of work put into uncovering some fascinating information, and I think we're all very excited to hear what it is. So let me introduce myself. My name's Adam Broin. I'm the chair of the Patriot Ripple Effect, and I wanted to tell a little bit of my story before we got started. If that's okay with you, Ray. I'm out of breath. I just ran back from the bathroom.
It's okay. Breathe deeply. You're
good. So I have to admit that I didn't do anything for years. I got sucked into doing nothing but complaining on Facebook and thinking that it did something. And at the end of the day, once things got bad enough, right, and after the election happened, and I went to D.C. in January, but let's not talk about that. And I saw like just how lost this country was, and it really made me realize that no one's coming. No one's going to do this for us. And all of that energy that I'd been spending posting things on Facebook, arguing with people that I haven't seen since high school, wasn't doing a darn thing. And the real trick is if we all just take time to do something conservative every day, take time to do an action, take time to get involved and find out what effective action is. And it doesn't take a lot of commitment. But if all of us do that, we can make some big changes in this state, and we can make some big waves across the nation, starting here in South Dakota. And so I want to thank Jessica Palma and the entire South Dakota canvassing group for all the work they've done, and I want to introduce Rick Weibel, the Midwest Swamp Watch. Everything that y'all have been doing here is fantastic. Before we get started, I'd like anyone who's a veteran to stand up. Awesome. And now stay standing. Stay standing. I'd like you guys to lead us all in the Pledge of Allegiance, if you'd be willing to do that.
And whacking the flag, I guess we'll use first shirt here.
Awesome. Are you ready, Rick?
I think so.
All right, super. Who's first, Rick or Jessica? All right, beautiful.
Either one. Again, I'm Rick Weibel, founder of Midwest Swamp Watch. I've been working on election integrity for, you could almost say, a couple decades. The reason why, so 4 years ago, I actually moved to South Dakota from Minnesota. And so we are tax refugees. My son went to school at South Dakota State University, and we followed him here. And so now we live in the city of Elkton, a beautiful community. And when I sit in my home office, I see Minnesota 1.5 miles away. It's kind of funny. And then as the sun sets, the windmills over there with their red alert system warn me not to go back. It's kind of funny. So I have a computer background. I started a small computer consulting company kind of on the side 26 years ago in the state of Minnesota, and then slowly grew it. And during that time, I worked for small and large companies and kind of got my teeth gritted in technology. First kind of got a Novell certification, then my Microsoft certification, then worked for Help Systems, which was a partner of IBM Global Services, and then ended up working on mainframes and mid-range systems, I-Series, P-Series systems, and developed the training manuals and the online training for those systems on the Help Systems side, where we as a vendor ended up creating the certifications for IBM system administrators. So we created automated systems like robot reports, robot scheduler, all that stuff. And part of that integration allowed us to integrate into Unix, Microsoft, iPhones, Samsung phones, all of that stuff, so that IT administrators could monitor all of their equipment remotely. And so this is a type of software that's used in banks, Federal Reserve, even Microsoft, Oracle, all of that stuff. So I was able to kind of develop my skills working for other folks, but then as time went on, I wanted to end the rat race. So my company started to grow, and I just said, I'm not going to work for anyone anymore. So in 2009, I took myself seriously and took my computer consulting company legitimately out into the forefront. Then I also was involved in politics in Minnesota. I was a small town mayor for 10 years in a small town in southwestern Hennepin County called the city of St. Bonifacius. During that time, I also had a front row seat in politics in Minnesota because I became the 3rd Congressional District co-chair for the Republican Party of Minnesota. So during those 8 years working with Congressman Eric Paulson, who was also a mentor to Kristi Noem when she became into the House in Congress. I also had a seat at the MNGOP in its state executive committee. So I was very active helping state senators, congressmen, and legislators run for office as well as local elections throughout Hennepin County, Minneapolis, Bloomington, Eden Prairie, etc. And then I got involved with a lot of campaigns across the board. But what was interesting is that I didn't realize that my service in my last year of being mayor would actually be critical to this journey of election integrity. In 2016, Hennepin County became a test county for the e-poll pads, Canoic Inc. When we received the contract from Hennepin County, it literally stated, we will provide no support on election day, we will not guarantee the accuracy, we will not guarantee anything about the equipment. Because of my relationship with my customers and being the mayor for the city of St. Bonifacius, I told my city council, there's no way we're signing this. If they can't guarantee something as basic as elections, there's no way I'm going to sit here and sign this contract. I then pulled the equipment out of the box, the Canoic poll pad and the Verizon Jetpack, and I wanted to see if I could hack it. At that time, iPhones, you could actually do a share a hotspot, and you didn't need to put a password in there. Your iPhones now, on version 12 and later, actually require you to have at least an 8-character password. If you jailbreak your iPhone, or if you have an older one, you can actually set up an iPhone to be the same name as that Verizon Jetpack, and guess what happens? those devices get lazy and they start logging into your phone. I delivered that information to my commissioner, Jeff Johnson, who was a commissioner for the Hennepin County. And I said, this is why we won't sign the contract. So that year in 2016, we used the paper check-ins, whereas the other 43 cities signed the contract. I still have that evidence, and we brought that forward to the legislature, and we use it in our cases. So fast forward to the latest election in 2020 in Minnesota. I was pre-working on those cases because right away, Keith Ellison and the Secretary of State, Steve Simon, joined forces to do all these consent decrees to basically bypass the legislature and change election law in Minnesota. They even wanted to do mass mailings of ballots in the very beginning. And because I worked with the Minnesota Voter Alliance to get their data up front, I had found out that there were 20,000 addresses in the state of Minnesota that didn't even have a house number. There was another 40,000 addresses where students lived that didn't even have an apartment number or suite number. My son, who was at SDSU, I asked him, because he was actually one of these resident assistants, and I asked him, so when a student gets a mail and it doesn't have their unit number, what do you do with it? Oh, we just put it out on the table, and then they can just sort through it. So there's no election security. So I alerted the Minnesota Voter Alliance. They filed suit against Steve Simon. That threat alone stopped the a la carte absentee ballot mail system in Minnesota. So then I partnered with them throughout to try and say, you know what, I think I know what's going to happen here. They're going to withhold election data, and so I alerted the minority leader of the House of Representatives in Minnesota, the chair in the Senate side, and I also worked with one of my friends who was in city council way back when, and I helped him become a senator, Dave Osmick. And I alerted him, I need you to start documenting the requests that you make for the voter rolls, and I think they're going to block you. Sure enough, they did. They blocked them throughout the election. So part of what's interesting about Minnesota is that they actually have a two-tier election system. South Dakota's kind of like this, but we don't get access to this information. In state statute in Minnesota, it says when an absentee ballot is received by the counties, it must be immediately entered into the statewide voter registration system. South Dakota also has a statewide voter registration system. In Minnesota, they started their absentee balloting process 46 days before the election. In state statute, they're not supposed to count the ballots until potentially 7 days before the election, but there's a conflict in the law because there's another part of the law that says absentee ballots can only be counted after the polls close on election day, after the regular ballots have been counted, so that they could go through the elections locally and then basically determine if somebody voted. And the original law that says must be entered in immediately, the second sentence says so that it prevents a voter from voting more than once. In Minnesota, there were 1,200 voters that voted more than once because the e-poll pads didn't stop them. And so now we have evidence. So I've been working with counties in Minnesota to gather that evidence in due diligence, and I'm going to come back here to South Dakota to train you guys how to do that as well. We've been working with the local sheriffs and the county commissioners to try and change and raise the bar on election integrity in Minnesota. So by going to the sheriffs, we're identifying the people who voted more than once, we're identifying the dead voters, we're identifying the P.O. box voters, which is all legal in Minnesota. The problem in South Dakota, and we worked with the legislature, we actually presented evidence and actually tried to get them to change it. We have some disappointing information later on that we're going to show you on specific bills. They didn't care, in summary, in South Dakota. So it's a lot easier to cheat here. It's different. The difference in the way that the cheating occurs is different between Minnesota and South Dakota and their unique stories. And I am appreciative to work with partners here in South Dakota to see that difference. And so working with Jessica and her team, I was a latecomer. I've only started working on the South Dakota story for probably about, I would say, since December. And then I've helped them do a digital canvas. We learned some information there. But I really want to thank Jessica and her team for the efforts that they've done in bringing me up to speed in South Dakota politics. And so it's a bit of a transition for me to kind of understand the nuances and the dramatic differences between the two states. And together, we have a plan of how we're going to move forward, because I need you guys to all understand, this isn't just a short-term fix, this is a long-term journey. And we have to finally wake up, and we have to all get engaged and be involved, because election integrity is actually the key to the rest of the way your government works. When you don't have election integrity, you'll actually have these consent agendas where you have government officials that won't discuss anything, and obviously they decided all of those matters behind closed doors outside of public purview. That's a disease. It needs to stop. So thank you, Jessica.
Yes, thanks, Rick. I'm Jessica Palama. I'm from Sioux Falls and have lived here for over 25 years. I've been in public accounting for 25 years, and the 2020 election sparked my interest in what was going on, and I just kind of started researching and deep diving, and there was, the Cyber Symposium was here last summer, and the PRE was gracious enough to give us a location to host an event. There was a Telegram chat, America's First Audit, and there was just some local patriots on that channel, and we all jumped in together to host this event, and Taffy was there as well. And so after that event, we decided that was enough chatting on social media, and nothing was going to get done unless we got together in person. So the rest of my team, can you guys stand up?
Give them a big hand.
Okay.
They've done such great work.
So these guys, none of us knew each other before this. So a bunch of random people that all care about the same thing got together, and we are like brothers and sisters now. We've spent so much time together, so much energy, so much of our own money together on something we think was very important. We think we're in the danger zone here in South Dakota, and we have a lot of work to do, and we're not going to give up, are we, guys? So thank you for coming today. We appreciate you guys taking time out of your holiday weekend to spend with us to find out about what's going on in South Dakota.
And so she has a separate organization that will be at the back end of the slide as well. But to contact me, you can find information at MidwestSwampWatch.com. You can see the Minnesota evidence there as well. You can also see a security scan that we did in Minnesota on all 87 counties on the Secretary of State's website. You can send tips for both South Dakota and Minnesota to us, and we'll help investigate those. You can also send affidavits there if you witnessed improprieties within the elections. In Minnesota, not only are we about the 2020 election, we've discovered a lot of stuff in the 2021 elections as well, and they're about to have another township elections in March here. So I want to kind of back up as to where it begins, and this is where some people will say you're a conspiracy theorist. No, I'm not. This is actually publicly available information. There's a little bit of history that you need to understand, and part of it is the Lafayette Group. The Lafayette Group, you see all those little badges there? They were the ones that basically started Homeland Security in the United States. They were the ones that basically designed the database, the back-end database for all of the three-letter agencies to be able to communicate with each other regarding terrorism. This is also, just so that I can be very clear about this, is you can go to their own website and you'll see that Chuck DeWitt actually worked for Joe Biden and was a friend of his. You'll also see another important fact pattern on their own website that brags about January 6, 2017, Barack Obama signed an executive order that allowed the Lafayette Group to basically be in charge of election integrity and security as part of Homeland Security. They created the network to basically start monitoring 34 states. These states are a perfect overlay of where all the Dominion machines are. You can also go to their website and look at who their officers are and their IT personnel. And when you look at their LinkedIn profiles, you will see a lot of cross-pollination between Dominion and the Lafayette Group. Their words, not mine. I need you to understand that fact pattern first. There's also some breaking news today out of Canada. It was actually last night. The Vice Prime Minister openly admits their capabilities. Last night for the truckers, they seized all of the regulated Bitcoin as well as the wallets through the exchanges. I want to remind you, those who own the keys control everything. Those who control the evidence. There's also breaking news last week that most of you probably missed. It's from the Durham report. The Washington Times basically explicitly shows how the main law firm of the Clintons, the Elias, created a fake IT organization that Trump hired for White House security and systems. So this is how the Clintons had access to what was happening at the White House and their remote equipment talking to the White House. There's a couple of YouTubers who are now talking about this, but you will, if you look for the Durham report and read through it, it will amaze you. The Elias Group is also responsible for a lot of the election lawsuits throughout the United States in defending the Democrats. So I want you to understand this is much bigger, and it will take all of us to clean this up. The other thing with government, how many of you have high expectations here in South Dakota in the way that government's run? Okay, I'm going to tell you, sorry, it's not that great. Especially after our experience, we have a long way to go. We need to have better public oversight, accountability, and local control. And that starts in this room. And that will compel some of you to potentially run for office, ask a lot of questions of your county administrators, ask a lot of questions of your legislators, and potentially ask questions of yourself, what can I do? We're going to help you guide through that today. Here's one of the ridiculous things where it starts right now. I want you to understand this fact pattern. In the 2020 election, your election was certified on November 10th. Guess what you can't do in 7 days? You can't honestly validate that election. You can't honestly go to the Secretary of State, request the database, and find out if the numbers even match. The number of ballots cast and the number of voters connected to show whether they voted absentee, by mail, or in person. In Minnesota, that date is November 24th. As an example, in Minnesota, when we were able to pull that data, they withheld it until November 29th for us to be able to get the data from the Secretary of State's office. The phenomenal thing, remember I talked about that must immediately? In Minnesota, there were over 700,000 absentee ballots not connected to a voter. They certified the election on November 24th. 5 days after the election, I get the data from the Secretary of State's office, and they can't prove their case. December 1st is the last day that you can file an election contest in the state of Minnesota. So I'm sitting there telling the 12 attorneys that I'm working with, I can't help you. I'm missing 38.9% of the overall data in the state. I can't tell you how many duplicate voters, how many fraudulent voters, how many dead voters, because I'm missing so much of the data. It's by design. We need to fix that. You need to understand that. South Dakota is the same way. In Minnesota, to request the data for 3.8 million people, it's $46. In South Dakota, to start the one-year subscription, it's $2,500 for basically 600 names, 600,000 names. And then for each request after that, it's about $200 to $250.
$250 if it's within a year of your original purchase.
Right. So when we talk about election integrity, that's step one. Lower those fees. You're the voter. You own the data. It should be free to any registered voter that can submit their driver's license in there and download it. I want you to understand it's not just us making this critical evaluation. We have the Heritage Organization that basically ranks us at a score of 62 and rank 22nd in the United States. But we would actually contend that they kind of misappropriate that score because we've discovered.
Yeah, they actually gave us more points than we deserved from the Heritage Foundation because our laws are so vague, they're so open to interpretation. They understood it as we don't have any drop boxes in the state, when in fact we do.
Yep. And here's the other thing. How many of you thought voter ID was actually really strong here in South Dakota? Raise your hand. I'm here to tell you it's garbage. Why? because you can actually fill out an affidavit to be an exception to the photo ID requirement. I promise I'm telling the truth that I actually live here. Such garbage. We should change that and make it better. The voter database, it's not even currently run against the Social Security Administration death records, state welfare, public assistance agencies, county tax records, nor do they check to see how many individuals live at an address. Our canvassers out there, they've got a great story to tell.
And we went to Pier on Wednesday to testify for election integrity bills that dealt with this very issue. It was just to run the death records against the Social Security Administration to make sure there was no holes, that were catching all of the deaths, and we were smirked at, and the bill was killed for reasons that had absolutely nothing to do with the content of the bill. So.
Right. That was my fault. I should have not answered the questions. I should have kept them on task, so I admit that. Absentee ballot, South Dakota does not require notarized or witness. South Dakota does not investigate the validity of an absentee ballot when the post office returns it as undeliverable by the post office. But that surprises you, huh? They're still in they're still in the database. Ballot harvesting, South Dakota allows third-party strangers to pick up and deliver a voter's absentee ballot. That was one of the other things that we were trying to fix as well. Voter assistance, South Dakota allows anyone to assist another person to vote without ID or any reason. So when you think of nursing homes and harvesting, we need to protect our vulnerable adults. Private funding of officials and agencies. Currently, we have a bill that has made it out of committee, so there's a little ray of hope.
Senate Bill 122.
Thank you. South Dakota allows private money to fund election officials and agencies. Google, Facebook, and others played a role. And we'll show you later on how much money was injected into South Dakota by county. Now, what's interesting is the data that we present, and this is where I try to stay away from the conspiracy theories and some of the other stuff, because what we did is we actually used data published from the Secretary of State. And what's surprising is that he can't even keep his own story straight. We should not have variations of numbers. And what you're about to see is just absolutely disgusting. And so Jessica kind of evaluated this through Microsoft Excel. I have kind of a cheap little database, FileMaker Pro, that I'm able to kind of run the data through and then kind of do some additional matches and stuff like that.
Right. Our brains don't work the same.
Which is good, because then we're able to validate a lot faster.
Yeah. And we double check each other, and we end up coming up with the same answer from a different approach.
Yep. So that's good. So what's interesting is on the Secretary of State's website, the screenshot that we took here on April 2nd, 2021, shows that there was 427,529 ballots cast in the state. But when we look at the county records, it only shows 422,609, so that's 4,920 short. Then we actually look at the data. So we have two sets of data from South Dakota. One is from September 22nd, and that actually shows more votes by 972. And then the next data set that we get in December 29th, 2021, now it's 455 votes that are under. That shouldn't happen, should it?
No, my accounting brain wants everything to reconcile, so when the numbers don't tie together, something's wrong, very wrong.
And I'm a data guy, so garbage in, garbage out.
Right.
So then when we look, kind of dived in a little deeper in the data, it gets a little bit more dystopian. So what was really cool is that, remember, we're supposed to be pre-registered before we could vote, but we did find somehow miraculously 163 voters voted on 11/3, but were registered after the election. How does that work in accounting?
Well, so accounting is date-driven in my mind. So if you receive maybe a registration, I would think that you would stamp it in your office maybe with the date it came in and enter the correct date, because if you have that in the Secretary of State's database, it invalidates that voter.
Yep,
So
and then
dates are pretty important, right, when you're entering the information.
And then-
so either it was done that way, they came in after the elect. I don't know how that works, but it
Right.
could be poor bookkeeping.
and then we have 552 voters that registered on 11/3, And 49 of them actually voted on 11/3. So that's another thing that's not supposed to happen.
South Dakota does not have same-day registration.
Minnesota does, without ID. Somebody, you can vouch for up to 8 people. All right, then we had 260 voters that voted on 11/3, and they registered between 10/20 and 11/3. That's also not legal. Remember, this is his data.
Right.
This is
You're supposed to
publicly
be
available.
registered to vote 15 days before the election, which per an email from the Secretary of State that I got was 10/19/2020.
Yep. And then we also had 11 voters that voted twice because we could see in the detail record, which is a separate part of the database. So either those are miskeys or the actual records that they voted more than once. There were 256 voters with original registration dates 100 years ago or more. So to put that in context, that means that they're a minimum 118 years old. 3 weeks ago, the oldest person in the United States passed away. They were 115. Now you get it. Okay. There was a bill to help clean that up. They didn't want that. They wanted to protect the dead, I guess. When we look at the 1229 data, this is what was phenomenal. So from an accounting perspective, I mean, you would think that by September of 2021, all that data should be done. Well, no, there was 146 new records of voter histories that weren't recorded previously.
So
Now remember,
they weren't
the,
in our September 21 database.
and I love her look because she's like, well, wait a minute, you just told us 2 slides ago that the numbers went down. How did the numbers go up? Yeah, there's manipulation behind the scenes. You're okay to have that visceral reaction. This is why we have, this is a kind of a barf bucket, but we're not going to allow you to barf from that. That's our donation bucket later. So, but that's why we have the caution there. And then there were 601 voter records that were removed since 9/22/2021. Now, what's interesting, the difference between Minnesota and South Dakota, in Minnesota, we only get to see the active voters. What's cool about South Dakota is that you get to see the active and inactive voters. What we're saying here is that they didn't flag them to inactive, they just completely eliminated them. So when we talk about data integrity, and so from an accounting perspective, and then I do this sometimes on the IT world where I'll get called by State Farm or IBM Global Services to go in and audit companies to kind of look at, hey, are there issues here? And when I was missing serial numbers and missing data, so like in her world, in the accounting world, if there's like missing check numbers in a serial, that's usually an indication of, uh-oh, we better dig deeper. Right. And then there were 36 new voters with original registration dates that were added in and for the 11/3. And then this is the other beautiful thing. When we talk about data integrity, there's literally 18 records that are completely blank and they voted.
Right, so we found this when we were comparing numbers, and I said, I can't get your number. Why can't I get your number? There has to be something missing. So we sat there on a phone call for a while and dug until we found it, and the 18 blank voters didn't download into my spreadsheet.
Right. But they were in the voter history on my side.
But they voted. So we had votes with no people.
Yep. So the other thing that's really fun too is part of why we were there at the Capitol Monday and Wednesday of this past week is we really wanted to have an open discussion about residency in South Dakota. Later on in the presentation, you're going to see why this is really important because holy cow, did this spider off into different directions that we didn't realize. And we need to really take this seriously. But what's funny is that the law literally says the term residence means the place in which a person has fixed or her habitation into which the person, whenever absent, intends to return. Okay, I want you to think creatively for a second. What does that mean? You can literally go to a hotel and get a receipt and say, I live here, and go get a driver's license and now become blessed as a South Dakota resident.
Yeah, in a discussion with an auditor, they said to me that you can literally claim a park bench and intend to return and be a South Dakota resident. So.
And they kind of do, whether it's a P.O. box or other stuff. So this is where we kind of go into. So there's these mail forwarding companies in South Dakota. It's kind of a cool thing. And we actually brought it up to the legislators in part of my testimony to kind of describe the top 5. This is actually a growth business, and we're going to show you. And it's crazy. So 10,388 votes from 5 mail forwarding companies that we looked at, 1,893 votes from campgrounds, hotels, and motels. And some of our canvassers that went and visited these hotels and motels, oh boy, were the owners pissed. They were like, that's why I get so much mail here. Even the hotels, they're like, they're not supposed to do that. 328 votes from invalid addresses. I mean, literally, there's no street number, no street address at all. It's just the city, that shows up there.
Or an empty field.
An empty field.
We actually do have a lot of people voting from empty fields in South
Yep.
Dakota, in case you were wondering.
And the other fun one is that there were 150 votes from actual police stations, like the one in Sioux Falls. Walmart, there were 17 people there. I guess Live Better is a real thing. And then nonprofits and government buildings. Church camp. I mean, it's unbelievable what is happening out there. The other thing that Jessica found out.
Yeah, I was digging into these P.O. box services and wanted to know where these people get their mail. So in our voter database, it's formatted with their residence and then their mailing address. So where they're registered to, and a lot of these are personal mailbox or P.O. box. However, a lot of them are out of state, so their mailing address is out of state. I mean, they get their mail there, they live there. A lot of people live in foreign countries such as Poland, Guam, Singapore, Mexico, Canada, all over the place.
In case you're wondering, none of these are located near a military base.
Now, these are not, we took out the military addresses, so they're voting in our elections.
So I asked the question, is residency for sale? So here's one of the companies, 514 America's Way, Box Elder. There are 11,757 registered voters there, but according to their website, there's only 64 full hookups, and for a total of 90 sites, and they have 3 guest rooms and 1 suite. Boy, is that bathroom busy. So I actually drove by there last weekend, and out there in Rapid City, when you drive into town, that big Love's gas station that's right there at the entryway? It's really 1 block before that. That's where that is. This is a mail forwarding company. So, and America's Mailbox, that's their sign right outside in front of their building. So obviously they don't live there. This is another one. This is what's really great, is they actually on their website give you the 1, 2, 3 step process how to get residency in South Dakota. And here they have 3,400 registered voters. And they have such great commentary on their website of, wow, this is such a great thing, not only for tax avoidance, but, to vote. And then another one here, this one was just phenomenal. This one here, 1,900 registered to vote, and they talk about the cost of $12 a month to maintain the forwarding, and then this is for the RVers, and here's kind of the traditional mail forwarding, what it looks like. Can I stop in? What is PMB, personal mailbox? It's just fantastic.
In the tiny print at the bottom, it says, first vehicle registration fee waived, $150 value.
Yeah.
Your $12 a month subscription. So your right to vote and your vehicle license.
Right. And then this has actually become an actual home-based business. At this residence, there are 1,400 people registered to vote. We also discovered something really cool that he provides you with this home address, and we've discovered that there are people coming in from other states to do the last thing up there, to get the advanced conceal permit, and they'll walk you through that. And so what's kind of funny is South Dakota and the federal government doesn't know that Minnesota's database has been broken for the last 4 years. So when they did this whole MNLARS program to redo the Minnesota driver's licenses, it's been broken. Minnesota's been a hot mess that they've had 3 different systems, 3 different vendors, and they still can't do the driver's licenses, the titles, the criminal records, none of that correctly. So in short, what happens is that a Minnesota person will come over here to this address, and they will literally register here. They do the background check, and oh, voila, look at that. This address doesn't quite match the Minnesota address. It must be a different person. And so, yeah, there's no criminal record. We don't see the felonies in Minnesota. Here's your permit. We have successfully prosecuted 56 people out of that house as a bystander. I help do that from the Minnesota side. They're going to, it varies because some of the penalties involve sex trafficking, human trafficking, drug running, and murder. And so the penalties are kind of all over that we've been able to help with on those cases. We have another 116 cases pending in Minnesota that I'm working with right now with the FBI. So this is really a growth business, and yes, it can be a can-do. We brought this up to the legislature. There's even this one here. It's actually a fake front. This business opened in February, Timmins Market, and behind the scenes, they are actually running this, and the organization out of Texas is basically out of Livingston, Texas, and they even say in that first little slide, you'll have a unique mailing address in Texas, South Dakota, or Florida, usable as your legal domicile. I can't even help, but the name is just great. Escapes RV Parks. So what are we escaping from? And so this whole escapees part, member benefits, everything there. But Timmins Market, when you go there and look, there is none of this logoization of this organization.
It's a grocery store.
It's a grocery store. Okay? Here's kind of the growth in itself. So this is kind of where if you wanted to start this business, this slide here proves that this is a growth business and a banker would love to invest in this. So we can see that in 2017, the total there, the blue box, it was right about 6,000 just between those 5 addresses, and now it's ballooned to just under 20,000.
That's a 300% increase in 4 years. So we're thinking, you know, if this is skyrocketing like this, what's going to be by the next election?
Right.
The one after that.
And then I also looked at the increased voting from mail forwarding, and you can see how it's trended between 2016, 2018, and 2020. So it is having an impact on our election. And specifically, I actually looked at a couple of the races. So 514 America's Way almost was 59% impact of the ballots for the Senate district race out there. Okay? The Senate district race was decided by 2,265 votes. So it obviously had an impact. Then in Potsdam, that impacted 15% of the race. And that race total, so the 1983, is significant out of that 2041. So that second place finisher may have actually, or the third place may have actually won versus a second place person. Then here in Sioux Falls, we see that one of the races, SD15, was impacted almost 15%. Then over at Emory, we see 7.8. And then another one in Box Elder, 5.4%. So to say that this doesn't have an impact is a false narrative. Okay? And when we look at the one bill, the amendment that caught everybody by surprise, the one that was the a la carte marijuana bill, do you think that the mail forwarding companies could have had an impact in that election, especially when I give you this number? The U.S. Postal Service identified 55,000 addresses out of our voter rolls as non-residential addresses that cast a vote. That vote separation was 35,000. The second marijuana bill that was completely a la carte, that vote separation was 35,000 ballots. But the U.S. Postal Service, when we submitted all of the addresses for verification, came back with 55,000 addresses were invalid as residential. And
commercial addresses.
they were commercial addresses. So the reality of that is the Postal Service is able to identify residential single family, residential multifamily, residential mixed with commercial, and pure commercial. The 55,000 are just the pure commercial, where nobody lives there.
For instance, I had someone call me from the west side of the state, and we're having troubles with people registering to vote from businesses. So we went over the database together and checked a couple addresses, and there's people to register to vote from Coldwell Banker Real Estate. And we did some digging, and it was because there was a life trust registered to those people, and they actually live in New Jersey, but they're registered to vote from real estate office. So I found that out last week sometime, I think.
Yeah. And then so campgrounds and motels. Our canvassers, when they interviewed some of the folks there, they were very unhappy to discover what was going on because they're just dumped with all this mail. And even in their agreement that is posted there, you shouldn't be claiming this as a residence. So we have some work ahead of us. So we had 1,251 registered voters with 418 votes from the Tower Campground here in Sioux Falls. There are people that do live there year-round, but not that many.
They have 120 sites, and they
Think
have
about that, 120 sites. So if you have 2 people living there, husband and wife, that would be a maximum of 240 votes. Uh-oh.
And they have a posted notice that you cannot use this address as your own. They must use a mail forwarding service, which there's plenty of those to pick from.
Right.
But we're still registering to vote from campgrounds.
Yeah. And then Yogi Bear Campground, again, also posted no permanent residents, must use mail forwarding. 662 registered voters, 196 votes cast from there.
And that property owner was not happy.
Right. And so you can see the list here. And even the hotel there, Hotel Quality Inn, Sioux Falls, 65 rooms, 404 registered voters, and 85 votes. You guys should be outraged. Then when we searched the term PMB, remember that in the previous slides, in the mailing address field, so this is the first field, not the forwarding area, because when you register to vote, you actually have 2 addresses. So the one is the residential, and the other one is, like me in Elkton, with the gentle caressing breeze of the South Dakota 40-mile-an-hour winds, and with a high school nearby, my mailbox is prone to get a little beat down, and the mail could end up in North Dakota. So we use a post office to send our secured mail, like our bills, so that we can collect them. So that's what that second field is for.
PMB means personal mailbox, in
Yep.
case you don't know.
And so we found 25,272 registered voters there, and 11,000 of them voted. Then we look at the P.O. box in the address field, which is not where they live. We find 9,408 registered voters. It's just, we've got to do better. Quick question. It could be, but South Dakota has a Safe at Home program that people could participate in where they can actually mass that. And what would happen is that there's actually an address at the Secretary of State's office that mail should be delivered to and then taken care of, and that's usually universally identifiable in all 50 states. And typically, if somebody does have a restraining order, there are rules that can actually hide their identity from the voter rolls, and so there are those processes available for those, I'm going to say, heartfelt victims that do need to be protected. And I'll give you an example in Minnesota. I've actually discovered 5 voters that are supposed to be part of the Safe at Home program that are listed in the database, and I have officially filed a complaint against Steve Simon that he's violated the law and the protection of those people. So, good question. So what's interesting too is this affected redistricting significantly. And so the quick map is, look at how far the district stretched for 34, or actually it's 35. So that little 35, that little indent into 32 there, right where the Y is, that's literally where that mail forwarding company is. Right off the highway. And so literally when we sit here and we look at District 35, wouldn't it be great? So a typical Senate district is 25,000 people. We've already learned that 11,000 people don't live there. Boy, they've got an easy job that she's never going to hear from their constituency.
Yeah, the census data is under 10,000 for 2020.
You should, and so what that's done is it's shifted enough of the districts that you're actually not being represented equally. So I want to understand, how are the people at the mail forwarding companies being taxed? No taxation without equal representation? We kind of violated that here. Because they're obviously not paying property taxes, and none of us pay a state income tax, and if you're not in the state, what sales tax are you collecting? So I also want to bring another thing forward as well. In Minnesota, I do a lot of security analytics, and I partner with a third-party company. It's called Security Metrics. They've been an industry standard for decades out there. What they do is they basically do credit card security. They will scan a website. They will actually have you answer a questionnaire as well to review your internal process to make sure that your company is doing all the right steps to protect your customers' credit card information. So like one of the rules is that if you're a call center, you're not allowed to handwrite somebody's credit card information on a piece of paper. So collection agencies are prohibited from doing that, as an example. Even catalog companies. Then when you are on a website, they want to make sure that you're doing the right steps of making sure that that little padlock is up there, that you have a secure socket layer certificate sitting up there, an SSL. Then they also want to make sure that your connections from the back end of your website, when you're collecting those credit card numbers, is that it's not being stored on your servers, and that whoever you're partnered with, that those credit card numbers aren't being stored as well, okay, without a bunch of hoops. So they've been around since 2006. Another company that I've created with a partner of mine, Chris Sankey, we have created a company called D3 Defense. And what we do is, just in full disclosure, we help companies with digital, physical, and cultural security. And people are always asking, well, what's cultural security? In short, if you treat your employees like garbage, they're not going to care about the first two. Okay. So it just cuts to the chase. The other thing that's important to understand is that Security Metrics is a GSA certified organization. That means that the government approves of their actions, what they do, and has said they meet the highest standards and that they can partner with Homeland Security, the IT services of many states, etc. Here's, in short, what happened in South Dakota is that I'll back up. In Minnesota, we scanned 87 counties. 52% of them failed, and so did the Secretary of State's office. But here in South Dakota, the Secretary of State's office also failed, but so did some of the counties. Where this is important is that you have organizations that are responsible for election security who can't even do basic credit card security when you register for permits, licenses, register your business online. And now we expect them to secure the elections? So what I want you to understand is that this is evidence of their work product. We actually tried to meet with the Secretary of State when we were out there on Wednesday afternoon, knocked on his door, and we had witnesses there. There were 5 of us that basically said, we are aware of security issues with your website, and we have evidence. Here's my phone number as well. He was unavailable to talk at that point in time, understandably, because we didn't make an appointment. But what's really disappointing is that through today, I have yet to receive a phone call from the Secretary of State's office. So immediately after we visited with him, we met with the Attorney General's office. And we actually gave him the evidence that we have regarding the Secretary of State's office and the score of the scan and the vulnerabilities. And we also gave him the evidence to prove to him, yes, that the state of South Dakota actually owns those IP addresses. And what was interesting is that as soon as I did that scan, somebody misrepresented themselves from the state of South Dakota and told Security Metrics that I wasn't authorized to do that scan and has permanently blocked me from being able to do that scan again. So that's part of our complaint with the AG's office, is that we want to work in partnership with the AG office to provide accountability and oversight to alert the public that registering your business in South Dakota is not safe when you're using a credit card, as an example. And it also tells us that they are not doing their due diligence, because as part of this security scan, it explicitly points out the patches on their server that they have not mitigated for the last 2 years. It costs them nothing to install the patches because they come from the vendors. And so that's detailed in our 66-page report. So I know, remember that expectation meter? I'm sorry, it's kind of gone, isn't it? So another thing here, I mean, it's truly true. Joe Biden said it best. Our president said, It's about who gets to count the vote and whether your vote counts at all. And I'm going to say that's also true with computer security. So how many of you have heard about these free VPN products out there that you can use on your computer? Okay. How many of you use them? Okay, good. I'm glad. All right, so let me put it another way. Those who control the encryption keys have access to all of your data. So when companies set up a VPN, they will typically own that Cisco router or whatever firewall that they're using. They get to type in what that security key is going to be, and then they install the client on that home computer that the remote teleworker uses, and then that connection is secure between that computer and that office environment. When you use Norton McAfee ExpressVPN, you're not the one setting that security key. They are. Whoever controls the keys controls the data. There's some late-breaking news regarding the Trump organization that I kind of explained earlier. So again, the IT department, the fake IT company that was created by the Elias law firm that Trump then hired, he didn't realize that connection. They're the ones that set up the security at the White House for the computer equipment, as well as Trump's access back into the White House to receive his emails, as well as his phone and everything else. The White House, the Trump personnel didn't own the keys, that company did. And this is why those text messages that appeared from Trump, they were trying to figure out how was that even possible that they got it. And that's because the IT company was the one spying on the Trump organization. Okay? He didn't know that. So election systems and software, I'll let you take over.
So we've been doing a lot of digging into our systems, our equipment, and all of this is readily available on the Secretary of State's website if you'd like to go and look. ES&S voting systems is used in the state. I've been doing some digging around, and the certifications in 2019 and 2021 happened in Pierre. ES&S State Certification Manager Mark Manganero, along with the Secretary of State, the Elections Board, and other officials were there both times. ES&S demonstrated the machines and new software that would need to be purchased to view the vote cast record. Now that's something that we're trying to FOIA right now, is the vote cast record. We are looking at having a more in-depth demonstration on this process in March 2020 from another ES&S representative. Further research on post-election audits will need to be conducted prior to any legislation drafted for future legislative sessions. That's Secretary of State in 2019. There is still no process for post-election audits, which Rick has a draft bill we'd like to get to someone. This has to be done. This goes along with your forensic audit idea. The only way to make sure that these machines are counting the vote correctly is to have a random precinct audit after the election and count by hand. And
that's part of the bill that I've kind of drafted up, is that I've taken the idea from Minnesota, which they have to help. What they did is they basically created a 3% post-election review of every single county where they're supposed to be randomly drawn. I've changed it for South Dakota to say that should be drawn on election day. Minnesota, they make that drawing in May, so basically they know ahead of time which precincts need to be perfect. Kind of a joke. So then what that does is it forces a 3% of the total election within a county to be hand counted to ensure that those tickets match the results of a hand count. Then the second part of that in Minnesota statute, which I've introduced here for South Dakota, is that if there is an error of more than 0.5%, three more precincts within 2 days must be hand counted. If there's another 0.5% error, the entire county must be recounted by hand. Okay?
So
I'm going to take this question here real quick. Go ahead. We figure most elections are not impacted by less than 0.5%, because typically when there is a small, when our elections are close, typically the campaigns have the ability to challenge that election and ask for a recount. And so with that part of the process being available both in Minnesota and South Dakota, we would prefer to leave that there. And then there's different processes as to how close that vote is as to who pays for it. So like when they're super close, the state pays for it or the county does. And then when they are outside of the range, then it's up to the campaigns to actually prove that we need to actually do a recount. So they have to put a bond up to basically pay for that election recount. So there's a little bit of onus on both sides. We don't want to have, we understand what the legislature is going to come across where it's just like, we don't want to do everything across the entire state. Okay, let's agree on some base numbers and at least have a start, and then at least start the process going forward. But right now we have nothing, which is terrible.
So the vendor of the machines in the state is the one who is certifying the machines in the state.
And that's actually a complete joke that we see across the United States. So one of the leading vendors, SLI, who's supposed to be this third-party arbitrator that goes around and actually audits these machines, it's a complete farce. Actually, in California, it's laughable because you can actually see this audit that was done in the fall of 2019. It was actually November 2019. They certified their equipment for the 2020 election, and in their report, they detail that they're running Windows 7 machines and that they're running Windows 2008 Release 2 machines. They didn't disclose in the report that January 14th, 2020 was the end of support by Microsoft for Windows 7 and the Windows 2008 Release 2 servers, that Microsoft was not going to release any new patches for them in time of the 2020 election. And yet, in their report, they sign it and write, this is certified for use in the 2020 election.
So to put it in, everyday language, like you hire a contractor to build you a home, and that home builder's finished with his product, it has to be
Inspected
by a building inspector. You don't just take the builder's word for it, and if there's something wrong with it, they have to fix it. So, and that's that way with almost everything in life. So we're not sure why something as important as our vote is left to not be certified by an independent party.
Right. It's kind of like your state agencies sitting there saying that, oh, our websites are secure. So where's that public report that we can review? Are you doing that yourself? Or are you having a third-party evaluator do it? Because if you're evaluating it yourself, this is one of the things, like for my customers, I'll never sit there and certify their equipment that it's completely secure without using a third party. And I usually have my customers pay for that third party directly, so that way they can have that communication. And that way that third party can hold me accountable for the work that I've done. That's the way that you do it right. Just like in a lot of state governments and county, you have a state auditor that can review the spending requests that the state legislature has put out there, and even the county dollars that have gone out there. That's why you have this independent third party outside of the inside organizations reviewing this.
So these are the machines per the Secretary of State's website that's used in South Dakota. We use ES&S tabulators. There's been reports of problems with these machines all across the country. We don't have the evidence for this yet.
Correct.
We're working on it. These machines can be connected to the internet.
Yep.
There's different models. The state orders them. In South Dakota, the law says we can't have machines that are connected to the internet. However, a lot of the machines can have a card stuck in them and run off of a Verizon hotspot. So we don't know if that's been checked because, again, the vendor is inspecting our machines. And again, post-election audit. So.
And here's So here's an example of the poll pads by Canoic Inc. And this is actually from Hennepin County. So this is where I'm going to kind of show you my experience here. So in Hennepin County, yes, there is a direct connection to the SOS. I actually got the contract that Hennepin County has with Canoic Inc. And on page 43, it actually shows the network diagram of how it's connected through the jetpacks with Verizon directly to the county and to the Secretary of State's office. And so I'm going to put a little asterisk here. There was a timestamp on Election Day in Minnesota that Attorney General Keith Ellison tweets out on Twitter at about 3:30 on Election Day, hurry up, get out and vote, we don't have enough votes yet. So that started the impetus for me to investigate, how would he know that, and then delete that tweet at about 7:45 that night. We've discovered it. And so we have discovered through our security scan of the Secretary of State's website that that election portal was completely wide open and people could literally query in real time who had voted. And we can see in the Twitter universe storm actual addresses of people who had not voted that they were going to go door knock on. That's how efficient it was. It was real time. And so when we think about elections, we also need to make sure that we talk about security from the standpoint that we need to make sure that we have local control, local oversight, and local accountability. In the old paper voter rolls, guess what doesn't happen? It doesn't broadcast over the internet. When you have this equipment, guess what it does? Broadcast over the internet.
Right, so just so those of you who don't know what we're talking about, an electronic poll pad is the electronic version of when you go in to vote and there's the big reams of paper and the ladies are sitting there and they check you in, check your ID. This is on an iPad. It's an electronic version of your paper check-in at voting day.
And to be clear, the third point here, e-poll books are not a certified piece of voting equipment. They do not undergo federal testing and there's no uniform standards. And the other thing too is like the cost for Lincoln County was $77,000 for the iPads only. No tech support or security was included in that contract. And so they're completely on their own. And here's one of the other dirty little secrets. Most iPads only have a life of 4 years. And so that means they're no longer going to get security updates or the latest iOS. So that means at some point they will actually fall outside of the guidance of Homeland Security where they post that these iOSs are no longer secure in our view because of the latest discoveries that we have out there. So the other thing is that there's these, not only are there the poll books, but there's these vote center counties. I live in Brookings County. We have one of these vote centers. This is something that's completely foreign to me when I moved here. I couldn't believe that Brookings County basically violates the ethics of local control, local oversight, and local accountability by literally allowing people to vote anywhere in the county. So that means for the city of Elkton, if we have a race over here during that same election, there are literally 16 other locations, I'm making that number up, north of 10 other precinct locations that have my ballot specific to my city and my precinct all over the county. That my election officials and election judges there and volunteers don't see the other side of what's going on. So all these extra ballots that are sitting out there, it's disgusting. And so we've got Brookings, Brown, Haakon, Hughes, Hyde, Potter, Sully, Yankton. Custer is not part of that, that are all using these vote center locations. But all of these counties are using the e-poll books.
Yep, and then the state law is quoted at the bottom there, electronic poll book security. In the bottom in red, the electronic poll book shall be connected to a secure internet or intranet connection.
Let me take a back step here.
Intranet research too.
How many of you have had an account at Wells Fargo? Raise your hand. How many, now all those times that Wells Fargo got hacked, you had to change your user ID and password. Remember that over the last 3 years? So what makes you think this state is better than Wells Fargo? How many of you heard about the Caribou hack, the Macy's hack, the Target hack? You're telling me South Dakota is better than them?
Sanford just got hacked, right? How many of you had to change your my chart?
Right. The best security is get rid of the electronics. Can you hack a piece of paper an actual logbook. Pretty hard to do it, isn't it? Because you'd have to run all over the state to get them all. As soon as you put it on the internet, now you've got one access from a keyboard warrior in a basement. Yep. Yep, a thumb drive, yep. Locations. Right.
Well, the scanners are in the vote center, so I think the ballots are taken from the precincts to the vote center, and the tabulators are in the vote center. And each tabulator has a memory stick. They take the memory stick, they take it to a approved laptop with a password. They log into that computer, then they log into Total Vote, and they upload the votes to the Secretary of State.
And so part of what we're removing is by taking the ballots from these precincts and centralizing them, we've lost the connection locally of those election judges to count those ballots and have a number before they lock everything up.
And then also too, is who's checking the tabulators, what's inside the tabulators to make sure they're really manufactured there. They're probably manufactured in China. Who's checking what's in there that whoever made those machines don't have passwords to check the tabulators. And also I have one more question.
The vendor.
That's right, it's the vendor.
The vendor, it makes it feel real secure, right?
The real answer is no one. And the state law doesn't have the teeth in it to do this type of audit. She's sitting there shaking her head, realizing, oh my gosh, this is such a train wreck.
Go ahead, Teresa.
Yep. Yep. So a network card, there's a couple of options for, I'm going to call it internet network connectivity. So how many of you have a computer at home? Okay, so how many of you have a laptop that has a wireless card in it? Okay, so that's option one. How many of you have a desktop PC with like a yellow cable going to a modem? Okay, so a few of you. So those are the two options. So you can have an Ethernet card there with a cable that can connect to a local LAN. So like if they're at a county office, it might be connecting that way. There's also like a small little USB thumb drive that can act like a wireless card, or it could be integrated in the machine itself like so many of the machines do have. And you really can't turn them off legitimately because it's a software turnoff. And it's kind of funny that they're not really off. They're still a little bit of a heartbeat.
So, Rick, the intranet then is machines talking to a computer in the same room, correct?
Correct. So an intranet is basically one that is just a local network that has no access to the internet. But the reality is that's usually never really true because all these machines are greedy. How many of you have experienced a Windows update that just totally destroyed your productivity? Yeah, that happens with these as well. And actually we have cases of that in Dakota County. We're at 10:30 in the morning in both 2020 and 2021. They did an automatic Windows update and download it and basically crashed the election. So that, right. And so sometimes what can happen is that you might have another machine that it can connect to because Windows has the ability to discover other machines in a range, and it will actually steal the updates from there. Yeah.
That's what's happening with the election equipment.
It's a little harder through the phone. If you used your phone as a hotspot, yeah, definitely a little leach over there and grab it. All right, so this is what I want you to understand. Remember we talked about third-party evaluators? These are the counties. This information is directly from the Secretary of State's website. You can go look at it right now. And the ones that are listed with these poll books, this is literally what they say. And it was unbelievable. So the fourth question down, will you be testing mobile hotspot devices at each of your polling locations? Yes, no. They selected both. And then not at the location, but on mock election is what they basically said. It specifically asked, if so, what date? They refused to fill it out. So that's Brookings. Great job. Then Brown over here, this one was great. Will you be testing your hotspot? Yes. And then they put, we use modem internet. And they don't fill out the date. Then Hacken County, they basically said, no, we're not going to test it. We use cradle ports. Okay. Guess what? Some of those cradle ports, there's one model that actually connects to the internet when you put it there for charging. Then in Hughes County, what was great here is, will you be testing your hotspot at each of your polling locations? Yes. And they're going to test it the night before the election, 11/2. Then we have High County, and they're basically saying yes, and they disclose Monday, November 2nd. What I love about this is that we literally broadcast when we're going to test it. So if you had a hacker that wanted to basically figure out what was going on, they could just go to one of those locations and literally see what happens. Then we have over here Potter County, yes, and they're not going to tell you the date, even though it's required. Then we have another one here at Sully County, yes, and again, it's the day before the election. So as a technical person, I'm like, what the heck are you doing testing the day before the election? If you have a problem, you now have no bandwidth to be able to fix it. Are you the dumbest people ever? You'd never do that. It's kind of like those of you that have worked for companies that have dumb IT people that literally don't test stuff and then they launch a huge system on you and then now you're trying to work on it. Why? Because they didn't do their due diligence. They didn't have a team of people from the employee staff to basically test this thing before it went live. How dare they do this? You literally created a process that could torpedo our elections and our businesses. How dare you? All right, then we have this other one here. Will you be testing mobile hotspots at each location? Again, it's the yes-no selection. And then the last one here, Custer.
Yankton tested theirs on election day, it just said.
Yeah, yeah.
Yankton was on election day.
Yeah, you're going to test it on election day. Don't worry about it. It's okay. And then over here, Custer is just like not applicable. That means, I don't know. We're just not going to do it. This is what we're delivering from the county level. I doubt that the county commissioners even knew that their employees put this publicly out there. So then the vote centers here described that earlier. And this is actually in state statute. This has to go away. It is so gross because you can just see that if we're not going to have control over our residency, we're not going to have, we're going to have these e-poll books out there that aren't even secure. How easy would it be for somebody to go in and start looking at an e-poll book and go, okay, well, these people didn't vote. I'm going to go ahead and cast ballots for these people, check them in, and I'm going to fill out the ballots over here because they're nowhere near my city that my election judges have no idea what's going on. So keeping it local is so important. Then when we look at the Minnehaha election budget, it is increased significantly.
Yeah, so our team's been doing a lot of work at the county level. Minnehaha and Pennington and Lincoln, we put in a lot of public records requests and requested the elections budgets breakdowns. Per a Kellerland article, it said that the elections budget went up by almost $500,000 for this year, and it sparked our interest. What in the world are they spending that money on? And it's not a presidential election year coming up, so what's happening? So we ended up finding the 2018 revised budget, and I made a comparison here to the 2022 final budget. So the increase is actually $400,000, but you can see it's kind of small print. Software and licensing up 153%, postage 360% because we love our absentee ballots. 2,037% increase in in equipment. Most of it all has to do with absentee and electronics.
So then I did a comparison for my home county, Brookings. So I first wanted to look at population. It really hasn't changed between 2014 and 2022. So that's kind of like the first barometer. Next up, the election rates really hasn't changed between the various elections, 2014 through 2020. So keep that in your mental mind. Then I looked at the Brookings County election expenses. Wow, does that shift? So then I kind of broke it down and figured out that actually that's the cost per ballot in Brookings County with a stable population. It has literally gone from $7 a ballot to $17 a ballot. That's the cost of electronics. We've literally made our elections more expensive. When we used to hand count it, it was $7 a ballot. Now we've introduced electronics to it, it's $17 a ballot. Do you feel like you're getting your value? No.
Right, so another thing I forgot to put in there about the tabulators. We were under the understanding that there was multiple counties out in South Dakota that still hand counted. We were trying to dive into which ones are they, because it has a lot to do with our data analysis. And per meeting minutes from the Secretary of State's website, the Secretary of State decided to purchase tabulators for all the counties in South Dakota that didn't have them or maybe didn't want them, and reimburse the counties that already did have the tabulators. So that's,
And
that
then,
was, I think, in 2020.
yep, and then so just reviewing the Brookings County election rates, drop boxes. This was really crazy. And so we actually, there's a case apparently here in this county that the county wanted to drop off an election box at a church. Now imagine this. How many churches do you know have cameras outside their building? How many churches have the staff to be able to review the tape, if you will? Do you think a church would want to hand over a tape to an election official to say, here's who approached the box? No. Luckily, the church said, no, we're not doing that. We're not doing that.
Yeah, so that's part of our local work here again, investigating which counties have drop boxes, when they got them. Did they purchase them with their Zucker bucks, or was it county money? We've been looking into the locking mechanisms, and we know that all of these drop boxes across the country come with a standard locking mechanism. So if they haven't put aftermarket locks on them, the same key opens every box. So I liken it to this, that we all live in the same apartment building, and my key opens every one of your doors. How secure would you feel living in that apartment building?
Right.
Not very.
Yeah.
Minnehaha County did disclose to us that they bought aftermarket locks and put them on their boxes.
Yep.
However, they're still outside.
Right.
We also asked about their video monitoring. Some of them do have high-def security, but no one is watching this video 24/7. So we have some nice high-quality video in certain instances with nobody watching it in the middle of the night. The video is only reviewed if there's a report of the box being vandalized, which people who are hired to drop ballots in the middle of the night don't vandalize the boxes. So that draws attention to them.
And in Minnesota, there was one driver's license plate that visited a drop box and dumped in ballots 35 times.
Yes, and we started to, we FOIA'd, I believe, our public records requests for this video, and it's gone. So it hasn't been 22 months since the election, but all of this video is gone. So we asked, how long do you keep it? 2 months and it's destroyed. So we can't go back and look at it, and nobody reviewed it in the first place. We don't want drop boxes.
Okay, don't worry about it. All right, so, and here's the South Dakota law that allows the drop boxes, and we just have to change this. It has to get cleaned up, you know, in short, because when we talk about ballot security, I mean, we should think of this like the $1 million lottery ticket. And do you think that you're just going to go ahead and put it in a drop box and allow the state to get you your winnings? Or do you think you're going to go in person to collect that money? How many of you would go in person? Raise your hand. How many of you would be okay giving that lottery ticket to your neighbor and having them go get it for you? Okay, I didn't think so.
Right, so the state law says, we were asking, is it even legal to have drop boxes in South Dakota? Because the state law says the voters shall either mail the ballot, deliver it in person, or have it delivered to the person in charge of the election. And this is where the Heritage Foundation gave us more points for our election security, because if you read the law, you would think maybe we don't have drop boxes.
Right. And then, so Zuckerbucks, so the company, or actually the nonprofit that they founded is the Center for Technology and Civic Life. So when we talk about Zuckerbucks, that's that 501c3 organization that they created. Across the United States, they spent $333 billion on elections across the United States. In Minnesota, it was $7.3 million. And then here in South Dakota, we've got the breakout by the counties. And so these counties literally were able to file a grant, send it to this nonprofit organization, and then get money to help them with the elections. You as a taxpayer should be ultimately responsible at the city, county, and state level to fund those elections, because who knows what strings are attached to this.
Right, so we started also digging into public records requests for the information, and so they had to fill out a grant form and what they spent the money on, so we've been digging into that. We have some of that information now, and most of it is, again, for absentee and drop boxes, and you know, the CTCL encouraged them to institute absentee balloting, drop box sites, and various drive-through voting.
And again, this information is public. This is the 990 form that is published on their website directly. That's for public view. And it actually outlines by county how much they requested, and then they give fake little notes as to what it's for. You know, so they basically support the safe administration of public elections during the COVID-19 pandemic. Let me remind you, the federal government passed the CARES Act, which funded the elections and all the PPE that all the cities, counties, and states would need.
At the bottom of this page of their tax return, Lincoln County, there you go, they made a mistake and listed Georgia, but this is actually the amount that Lincoln County, South Dakota received. And they did pay their poll workers more, so they used the money to pay their poll workers.
And so here's a great grant that was received. So Lincoln County got this beautiful drop box from it, and they also help fund the temporary election workers as well. And so here's the actual kind of the letter here.
I think it was county money that was spent on the drop box.
Okay.
It wasn't CTCL.
All right. And then here are some of the results from the volunteers.
Yes, our group has also been going out canvassing. It's a lot of work to get this even prepared for people to go out and do. So our team has spent countless hours making spreadsheets, mapping routes, recruiting volunteers. So we were excited to finally be able to go out. And also we needed to make sure it was legal. We were following we have a chain of command process with all of our paperwork. So it wasn't just a willy-nilly, let's just go out and see what we can find. So we did finally go out, and we went to Lincoln, Minnehaha, and Pennington counties on average after we came back. So a lot of people are gone on Saturday, so about 40% of the doors were answered. But of those doors answered, 94% in Lincoln County, 98% in Minnehaha, and 100% of the doors answered had voters on the rolls with people not living there. So I think we collected affidavits from 90% of them. So we plan to take those to the authorities that can fix this. There were some, Cindy, where are you, Cindy? Can you come and tell your story that you've told a few times this week already about the person not living there for 12 years? I'll butcher your story, so.
So we went door to door canvassing, and we were canvassing the doors or the houses that had more than that had 5 or more registered voters. So I went to this door, knocked on the door, we asked them, you know, does your name match what we have on our voter rolls? And 4 of the 5 people matched. It was that family that lived there. When they asked about the 5th name and we told them who it was, they said that was the original homeowner. They have not lived here for 11 years. So that original homeowner is still registered to vote at that address. So the homeowner challenged us to take a look at the voter rolls to see if that person did in fact vote, because that person's mail is still coming to that address. They're getting rebate checks, they're getting all sorts of information in regards to that voter or that resident that lived in that house 11 years ago. So we looked at the voter rolls, and that person did indeed vote in the 2020 election. So he hasn't lived there for 11 years, and yet he claimed that as his personal residence, and he voted from that address.
And we have a lot more instances of stories just like that.
Do you know where that person lives? Person that voted? Do you ever find out?
No, we don't know where that person is. No.
So it's kind of a recap. So yes, there are significant data issues from the 2020 election that you were able to see here. Secondly, there are definitely residency issues that we need to take up into consideration and re-examine as a state. 3, yes, there is voter fraud in South Dakota. You just heard evidence of it here. But we can't call it fraud because it's legal. So until we clean up our act, we don't have the teeth in state statute just to get ahead of this curve. It had an impact on redistricting. So for the next 10 years, all of you are being misrepresented. So what are the recommendations? It's time to get involved, but we also have to look at some of our at-risk communities. We've discovered that Native populations and Hutterite populations are being ignored. Their voting percentages and populations in some of the elections are so low that we've got to do a better job. We need to look at culturally, are we better off putting in-person precincts in some of these communities so that they can keep their communities safe? Some of the folks are not willing to bring their younger voters into a city location to cast a ballot. So we have to think about, do we put voting precincts out in these communities so that they can participate in the election? We also have to restore confidence in the election. We need to do a statewide canvassing. We also need to do a review, at least 3% of all the counties. And we also had to have more post-election reviews of the equipment itself and pre. These are some of the bills that were out there. Unfortunately, so I'm going to let you go through these.
Okay, well, we'll start with number 1 there. What can we do? Get involved, go to your county meetings, go to your city council, help us with canvassing, sign up to be a precinct committee person. There's still some seats open. Let's fill them with good people. Sign up to be a poll worker and a poll watcher. It's more important for us to fill our poll worker positions. We've been watching a lot of bills, SB 69. So when we went and testified this week for bills that we support, we were mocked and then told that we should consider supporting SB 69, which is what we are testifying against. We don't want electronic voter registration updates.
And then the second one, SB 122, the private funding ban, that one's made it out of committee. We need you to write all of your legislators to make sure that they continue this support. So we have to get rid of the Zuckerbucks and future injection. We also want you to write letters regarding the SB 123. The first part of the paragraph was good, but the rest of it was complete garbage. And then SB 124, the voter registration updates, we need that to come back. They should reconsider that bill, because I cannot believe that they don't care on cleaning up the voter registration rolls.
It was actually killed because of people like us.
Yep. Yeah, and that's what they said. Because of people like us. They were that discriminatory towards us, saying that we were like some crazy organization. We literally just want to have a good basis point of good, clean rolls. People who are dead shouldn't be in there. People who don't even live at that residence shouldn't be in there. They should be at their correct residence. That would be directly Schoenbeck. Yep. So,
Drew Dennert brought forth 1206, I believe, to reduce the fees in half. That would cost us less money, whether we appreciate that, but we still think it should be free.
and so when we talk about discrimination in our election system, isn't it funny how the left always talks about, well, if you're going to have voter ID, you're going to have a poll tax, that's all racist. But if we want to have any election accountability or integrity, we don't have that same discussion to say, you know what, everybody should have an equal shot to review the elections, to have confidence in their elections.
Right, so Taffy Howard, she's here today. Taffy, she brought forth HB 1329, which we testified for this week, for the forensic audit after each presidential election. I believe if the top candidates were 10% apart. Oh, okay, so we think that's great. We also believe that we should probably have an audit anytime we're using electronic machines, but we got to start somewhere. It's a tough crowd. SB 185, it was just simply to update the death records, and we just added something in there about cross-checking it with the Social Security Administration, killed in committee for, we're not sure why.
They want to protect the dead.
SB 202 was an awesome bill. Hopefully we can get something like this rewritten and pushed through next year. Maybe start in the House, I don't know. It was an excellent bill. It had all kinds of great points in it.
Good. Yeah, that's what we showed up here in the slide, and I testified against. I can get you that. I'll have to look up the name on the slide. Shows just the Senate district that it's there. And then, so the South Dakota canvassing group.
Yes, so you can sign up to Canvass at sdcanvassing.com is our website. You can scroll down to the bottom and you can fill out your information. You can email us if you want to volunteer or to give us tips on things that you know about elections you'd like us to check out. We send people out in teams of 2. Your route is mapped out. You have 5 easy questions to ask. And we found after our first time out that most people that answered the door were very receptive and, you know, friendly to us and happy about what we were doing. We have 2 or 4 hour shifts available. We have a half hour of training before you go out. The next canvassing date is Saturday, March 5. We meet at 11:30 for training and we canvass from 12 to 4. You bring back all your affidavits. We have a notary there. She signs them. And we can also use some money for our cyber canvassing, mail canvassing, walk canvassing, purchasing information. Sometimes these data requests cost money.
They do.
Yeah.
And then,
A Telegram page. It's South Dakota Canvassing Group. I believe you have to be invited. So find someone on our team if you'd like to be involved in that. And we're partnering with Midwest Swamp Watch for the donations.
yep. And so I'm going to pass the BARF bucket, donation bucket, around. So if you'd like to donate to our efforts, please donate in the bucket, or you can come to Midwest Swamp Watch, and we actually have different buttons for Minnesota and South Dakota that you can donate to specifically. So it's just not going into an overall pool. And then also the Sioux Falls area Patriots, the Patriot Ripple Effect. Second and fourth Thursdays at 7 p.m. here, and room 200. Make sure you show up. It's a good group. I was here last Thursday, and it's a very active group. And so remember when I talked about before about supporting candidates, and maybe you have to become a candidate, and also talking with your commissioners and local officials. This group will be instrumental in helping you through that process, so you don't have to do it alone.
questions, anybody?
So you guys have been great. Those of you that want to ask questions afterwards, we'll stick around for a little bit. Go ahead, sir. So I want to get to actual questions. He's right about the statements there, and we do have to wrap up here shortly. And we'll stay around for questions and interviews as well. And I want to thank all of the candidates who've shown up here today, as well as any elected officials and any county workers. I appreciate you coming here to, as he suggested, potentially get about 2/3. That's really generous. Most people with this type of a fire hose of information of event, if you got 10%, consider yourself lucky and successful. So don't diminish that, because each step is a step in the learning process. But we wanted to lay out enough keys out there, and between our two different styles, people do have different learning styles. That's okay. But look around the room. These are your friends that you continue to have conversations, and you can also send emails at tips@midwestswampwatch.com if you have further questions. Plus, this great leader here locally can also get a hold of me as well, and I can always come back down and to one of the meetings and provide additional. And Jessica is local here too, and so she's around. And so that's why Midwest Swamp Watch, we've been out touring Minnesota and South Dakota to work with local organizations to help them understand more of what's going. And so I'm one of these guys that's real, available, and local. You know, so that's why I work so hard at doing this at the sacrifice of my own business, but I try to do my best.
Awesome. Let's give a warm round of applause for our guest speakers. Jessica, Rick, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for everything you're doing. Appreciate it. And I know we have some political candidates here in the audience, so if you could stay afterwards, connect with them. I'm sure there's some ballots and some ballots that need sent. Thank you. Petition. That's the word. Some petitions that need signing, and there's a lot of ways to get connected and involved. See any of us afterwards if you're wondering what the next step for you is. And thanks again. Thanks for coming, everyone.